Every spring, garden centers fill their entrances with trays of flowers designed to look irresistible for a few perfect weeks. The colors are bright, the plants are already blooming, and it is easy to imagine that display lasting all summer. But many of those flowers are annuals. They grow, bloom, produce seed, and finish their entire life cycle in a single season. By the time cold weather arrives, the plants are gone, and the following spring, you have to buy them again. Annuals are not bad plants, and they can be useful for filling containers or adding quick color. But they should not be the only thing holding your garden together. A garden built around dependable perennials works differently. You plant the right flower in the right location, help it establish during its first season, and then watch it return from the ground year after year. Many become larger. Some can be divided into free plants. Others feed bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and seed-eating birds long after their flowers fade. The real value is not simply that they survive winter. It is that the garden becomes more complete without being rebuilt every April. The 9 flowers in this list cover sunny beds, difficult dry soil, moist borders, shady corners, early spring, midsummer, and late fall. Some are nearly indestructible. Others require more patience, but reward that patience for decades. Before choosing any of them, remember that the word perennial does not mean immortal, and it does not mean effortless. A perennial still needs the correct hardiness zone, light exposure, drainage, and establishment care. Black-eyed Susan is a perfect example. Garden centers often place several different Rudbeckia species under the same common name, and they do not all behave identically. Some are annuals, some are biennials, and some are short-lived perennials that maintain themselves mainly by reseeding. For the most dependable perennial performance, look for Rudbeckia fulgida, or proven perennial cultivars suited to your climate. Once established, these plants produce masses of golden yellow flowers with dark central cones from midsummer into fall. The petals remain clearly visible from across the yard, which makes Black-eyed Susan especially effective when planted in groups rather than as one isolated plant. Most varieties grow roughly 2 to 3 feet tall and hold themselves upright without complicated support. They perform best in full sun, although a little afternoon shade can help in regions with extremely hot summers. Their greatest strength is adaptability. Established plants can tolerate periods of drought, summer heat, clay, average garden soil, and conditions that cause fussier flowers to decline. What they do not tolerate well is constantly saturated ground. The soil does not need to be rich, but excess water must be able to drain away. Depending on the species and cultivar, perennial Black-eyed Susans are commonly grown through much of USDA zones 3 to 9. Check the label, instead of assuming every plant with the same common name has the same hardiness. Leave at least some of the seed heads standing after flowering. Goldfinches and other seed-eating birds may visit them during fall and winter, and fallen seed can produce new plants nearby. This does not mean you should allow the plant to take over the entire bed. Remove unwanted seedlings in spring, or move them while they are still small. Deadheading some flowers can encourage continued blooming, while leaving others provide seed and winter structure. That balance gives you a longer display without turning the garden into bare soil as soon as summer ends. If you enjoy practical garden choices that save money and become more useful over time, subscribe, because this channel is about growing more from the plants and materials you already have. The second perennial is one that many gardeners have unknowingly purchased in the wrong form. Salvia can refer to annual bedding plants, tender ornamental species, culinary herbs, and hardy perennial varieties. For a flower that reliably returns after winter, look for perennial meadow sage, often sold as Salvia nemorosa or one of its hybrids. Hardy perennial salvia forms an orderly mound of foliage topped with upright flower spikes, usually in shades of violet, purple, blue, pink, or white. It is valuable because it blooms near the transition between spring and summer, when early bulbs are fading, but many midsummer perennials have not yet reached their peak. A healthy plant in full sun can produce a dense first display. When those flower spikes fade, do not remove only the brown tips. Cut the spent stems back more decisively, usually to the fresh leafy growth near the lower part of the plant. Give it water if the soil is dry, and new stems can develop for another flush later in the season. In long growing seasons, some varieties may bloom again in early fall. Perennial salvia prefers full sun and sharply draining soil. It is more likely to fail from wet winter soil than from summer drought. Avoid planting it in a low area where water collects after storms, and do not surround the crown with a thick layer of constantly damp mulch. Most commonly sold hardy cultivars perform somewhere around zones 4 through 8, although the exact range varies. The aromatic foliage makes salvia less appealing to deer than many soft-leaved flowering plants. But no plant is completely deer-proof when food is scarce. Bees, bumblebees, and other pollinators regularly work the flower spikes. Plant 3 or 5 together, and the repeated vertical shape creates a stronger effect than scattering individual plants around the bed. The third flower is coneflower, one of the most recognizable native-inspired perennials in American gardens. Purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, produces broad petals surrounding a raised central cone. Modern cultivars are available in orange, red, yellow, white, pink, and green-toned combinations, but the original purple forms are often among the strongest and most dependable. Highly bred, double-flowered varieties can be visually dramatic, yet some produce less accessible pollen and nectar than simpler, single-flowered forms. If wildlife value matters, include at least a few plants with open, visible central cones. Coneflowers perform best in full sun and well-draining soil. They can grow in clay and tolerate dry periods after establishment, but newly planted coneflowers still need consistent moisture while their roots expand. Their hardiness often extends from approximately zones 3 through 8 or 9, depending on the variety. Avoid treating the zone range as the only requirement. A plant may survive the lowest winter temperature listed on the label and still decline if its crown sits in wet soil all winter. Drainage matters. Coneflowers normally begin blooming around early or mid-summer and can continue well into fall, particularly when some spent blooms are removed. Leave several mature seed heads standing. Goldfinches may feed from them, and the dark cones provide structure after frost has taken the petals. Coneflowers can also self-seed, although seedlings from named hybrids may not look identical to the parent plant. That is not necessarily a problem. A seedling with a different shade or flower shape can become part of the character of the garden. The mistake to avoid is cutting every stem to the ground the moment fall arrives. Leaving healthy stems until late winter gives birds access to seed and helps you remember where the crowns are located. Cut the old growth back before or just as the new spring shoots emerge. The fourth perennial is the daylily, and few flowers demonstrate the long-term value of division as clearly. A daylily flower normally remains open for only a day, but an established clump sends up branching stalks carrying many buds. One bloom closes while another opens, creating a display that can continue for weeks. Different cultivars flower at different times, and some rebloom later in the season. Colors include yellow, orange, red, burgundy, pink, cream, near white, lavender tone shades, and complex bicolors. True clear blue does not exist, despite photographs that may suggest otherwise. Daylilies tolerate a wide range of climates, commonly from zones 3 through 9, and sometimes warmer areas depending on the cultivar. They bloom most heavily in full sun, although they can grow in partial shade. In extremely hot regions, some afternoon protection may preserve the color of darker flowers. Established clumps handle ordinary soil, heat, and temporary drought better than many garden perennials, but regular moisture during bud development usually improves the display. The arching leaves create a dense fountain of foliage that can shade the soil and reduce weed growth. Over time, the clump expands by producing additional fans. When flowering begins to decline, or the center becomes crowded and weak, dig and divide it in early spring or early fall. Separate the clump into sections containing several healthy fans and roots, then replant them at the same depth. One mature plant can become several new plants without another trip to the nursery. There is one warning. The common orange roadside daylily, Hemerocallis fulva, can spread aggressively through underground roots and may be considered invasive or problematic in some regions. Choose well-behaved, named cultivars for mixed garden beds, and check local guidance before moving roadside plants onto your property. After blooming, remove spent flower stalks if you want a tidier appearance, but leave healthy green foliage in place. Those leaves continue producing energy for the crown. Cut them back only after they yellow naturally, or after frost ends the growing season. The fifth flower is garden phlox, Phlox paniculata, a tall summer perennial capable of filling the back of a border with large, fragrant clusters. The flowers may be white, lavender, pink, magenta, coral, red-toned, or patterned with contrasting centers. Established plants often reach 3 to 4 feet, although compact varieties are available. Garden phlox usually blooms in the hottest part of summer, when the spring display has disappeared and many gardens need height. Butterflies visit the broad flower clusters, and hummingbirds may investigate the tubular florets, especially on pink and red varieties. Garden phlox needs more moisture than Russian sage, catmint, or established black-eyed Susan. It prefers fertile soil that drains well, but does not become completely dry for long periods. Water at the base of the plant instead of repeatedly wetting the leaves. The most common problem is powdery mildew, a pale coating that develops across the foliage. Mildew is encouraged by susceptible varieties, crowded growth, poor air movement, and stressful growing conditions. It is not always caused by a careless gardener, but good spacing helps. Choose mildew-resistant cultivars when possible. In spring, remove weak stems and allow the strongest shoots to develop with air between them. Do not crowd the plants tightly against a wall or surround them with taller foliage on every side. A sunny location often produces stronger stems and more flowers, although some afternoon shade can be useful in very hot regions. Garden phlox is generally suited to zones 4 through 8, with some variation among cultivars. After the flowers fade, cutting off the spent clusters can prevent excessive self-seeding and may encourage smaller secondary blooms. Divide overcrowded clumps every few years, discarding weak woody centers and replanting vigorous outer sections. The sixth perennial is Russian sage, now botanically classified as Salvia yangii, although many plant labels still use the older name Perovskia atriplicifolia. It creates a completely different effect from large daisy-shaped flowers. Silvery stems and finely textured leaves support clouds of small lavender-blue blooms from midsummer into fall. From a distance, a group of Russian sage looks almost like blue mist suspended above the ground. It is particularly effective behind yellow flowers, such as black-eyed Susan, or beside ornamental grasses that move with the same late summer breeze. Mature plants often reach 3 to 5 feet, though compact cultivars are available for smaller gardens. Russian sage needs full sun. In too much shade, the stems stretch toward the light, separate, and fall outward. It also needs drainage. This is not the plant for an irrigated low spot or a heavily watered bed filled with moisture-loving flowers. It performs well in lean, dry soil and is useful in alkaline regions where other perennials struggle. That does not mean the roots should be abandoned during the first season. Water deeply while the plant establishes, then allow the soil to dry between waterings. Once mature, it is highly drought-tolerant. Russian sage is typically hardy through approximately zones 4 to 9, depending on the variety and winter drainage. One of the most common mistakes is giving it too much fertilizer. Rich soil and high nitrogen feeding produce rapid, soft growth that cannot remain upright. The plant may become larger, but look weaker. Place it in an open, sunny area, avoid heavy feeding, and allow its natural woody base to develop. In late winter or early spring, cut the previous season's stems back to several inches above the ground, or to visible, healthy buds, depending on how the plant behaves in your climate. Avoid cutting it down during a warm spell in early winter, because new exposed growth may be damaged when colder weather returns. The seventh perennial is bleeding heart, the answer to a completely different gardening problem. Sunny borders have dozens of reliable choices. Deep or dappled shade is more difficult, especially when gardeners try to force sun-loving plants into it. Traditional bleeding heart, Lamprocapnos spectabilis, grows from a durable underground crown and produces arching stems lined with hanging, heart-shaped flowers. The classic form has pink outer petals and a small white inner section, while white-flowered forms create a softer effect in dark shade. Bleeding heart blooms in spring, often alongside emerging hostas, ferns, hellebores, and woodland bulbs. It prefers partial shade, humus-rich soil, good drainage, and steady spring moisture. Depending on the form, it can be hardy from approximately zones 3 through 9. Its most confusing behavior is summer dormancy. As heat increases, especially in warmer zones or dry locations, the foliage may turn yellow and disappear. The empty space can look like a dead plant, but the crown may be alive underground and waiting for the following spring. Do not immediately dig it up. Mark the location, reduce watering once the foliage has fully died back, and allow the plant to rest. Design around this disappearance by placing bleeding heart near hostas, ferns, astilbes, or other shade plants whose leaves expand as summer begins. They will cover the gap without disturbing the dormant crown. Bleeding heart dislikes frequent relocation. The roots can be brittle, and a mature plant may take time to recover after being moved. Choose its location carefully before planting. Avoid dry soil directly beneath a tree trunk where dense roots capture nearly every drop of water. A woodland edge with filtered light and soil that remains evenly moist is usually more successful than the darkest, driest corner of the yard. The eighth perennial is catmint, usually a garden form of nepeta rather than the more potent catnip commonly grown specifically for cats. Catmint forms a low, spreading mound of aromatic gray-green foliage covered with lavender-blue flowers. Many varieties bloom for an unusually long period, beginning in late spring and continuing in waves through summer. The soft color works beside roses, daylilies, salvia, coneflowers, and nearly any warm-toned perennial. Catmint is useful along pathways because the leaves release fragrance when brushed, although it should be placed far enough from the edge that its stems do not cover the walkway. It performs best in full sun and well-draining soil. Established plants tolerate heat, drought, and alkaline conditions. Many varieties are hardy through zones 3 to 8, with some extending beyond that range. Bees visit the flowers constantly. Although ornamental catmint is usually less attractive to cats than true catnip, some cats may still investigate, roll on, or damage young plants. Protect newly planted clumps temporarily if cats in your neighborhood show interest. The technique that keeps catmint dense is cutting it back after the first major bloom. When the stems become faded and open in the center, shear the plant down by roughly 1/3 to 1/2, rather than removing individual flowers one at a time. Water it deeply, then allow new growth to emerge. The plant can form a fresh mound and produce another flush. Avoid cutting every stem down to bare woody crowns during extreme heat. Leave some healthy foliage to support recovery. Catmint, planted in heavily fertilized soil, may become loose and floppy, so compost and fertilizer should be used conservatively. Divide mature clumps when the center becomes weak, then replant vigorous outer sections. The ninth flower is Baptisia, commonly called false indigo, and it rewards patience more than immediate intervention. Baptisia produces upright spikes of pea-shaped flowers, most famously in deep blue or violet, although white, yellow, burgundy, smoky purple, and bicolored cultivars are also available. After flowering, it develops attractive seed pods that darken as they mature and may rattle when dry. The blue-green foliage remains dense and shrub-like through much of the growing season, allowing Baptisia to function as both a flowering perennial and a structural background plant. A mature clump can reach 3 to 4 feet in height and width, so it needs permanent space. Do not place it where it will have to be moved 2 years later. Baptisia develops a substantial root system and strongly resents transplanting once established. During the first year, growth above the soil may look modest because the plant is investing heavily below ground. The second year normally looks stronger. By the third season, a well-placed plant may begin showing the size and flowering performance gardeners expected when they bought it. Baptisia grows best in full sun, although light shade is tolerated. It prefers average to lean, well-draining soil and becomes drought-tolerant after establishment. It is commonly hardy from zones 3 through 9. As a member of the legume family, Baptisia can form relationships with nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules. Most of that nitrogen supports the Baptisia itself while it is actively growing. Over time, decomposing roots, leaves, and plant material can return nutrients to the surrounding soil. But Baptisia should not be treated as an instant fertilizer for neighboring flowers. Its primary value is still its longevity, structure, flowers, foliage, and wildlife support. Avoid dividing it unless absolutely necessary. If seed pods are left standing, seedlings may appear, but hybrid offspring may vary from the parent plant. The success of all 9 flowers depends on how they are planted. Start by matching the plant to the site rather than trying to force the site to match the plant. Russian sage and catmint belong in bright, dry, free-draining areas. Garden phlox needs more consistent moisture. Bleeding heart needs shade and spring moisture. No amount of fertilizer can compensate for the wrong light exposure or constantly wet roots. Prepare an area wider than the nursery container instead of creating a tiny pocket of perfect soil surrounded by untouched compaction. Loosen the soil across the planting area when possible, especially if construction traffic or heavy foot traffic has compressed it. In average garden beds, a moderate amount of finished compost can improve structure and biological activity. Do not automatically add several inches of rich compost around Russian sage, catmint, or Baptisia. These plants often perform better without excessive fertility. Dig the planting hole wider than the root ball, but no deeper. Remove the plant from its container and examine the roots. If they are tightly circling the outside, loosen them gently and direct several roots outward. Set the crown at the same level it occupied in the container. Planting too deeply can hold moisture around the crown and encourage rot. Backfill with the loosened native soil. Press gently to remove large air pockets, and water slowly until the entire root zone is wet. During the first growing season, none of these plants should be treated as fully drought-tolerant. Their roots are still limited to a relatively small area. Check the soil several inches below the surface and water deeply when it begins to dry. Deep watering encourages roots to expand downward and outward. Frequent surface sprinkling encourages shallow roots and may leave the lower root ball dry. Add approximately 2 to 3 inches of mulch where appropriate, but keep it away from stems and crowns. A volcano of mulch touching the plant can trap moisture, hide rot, and provide shelter for pests. Once the plants are established, begin planning for succession rather than trying to make every flower bloom at the same time. Bleeding heart and Baptisia provide spring interest. Salvia and catmint carry the border into early summer. Coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, daylilies, and garden phlox build the main midsummer display. Russian sage continues through late summer and fall. Repeat plants in several places, so the eye moves naturally across the bed. Use groups of 3 or 5 where space allows. Place lower catmint and compact salvia near the front, medium-height coneflowers and black-eyed Susans through the middle, and taller phlox, Baptisia, or Russian sage toward the back. Leave room for mature size. A small nursery plant can be misleading, and overcrowding creates more maintenance, weaker flowering, and greater disease pressure later. In spring, remove damaged winter growth and divide only the plants that benefit from division. Daylilies, black-eyed Susans, catmint, garden phlox, and some coneflowers can be divided when crowded. Baptisia and established bleeding heart should generally be left undisturbed. Russian sage is normally renewed through pruning rather than routine division. During summer, cut salvia and catmint back after major flowering flushes, deadhead selectively, and water at soil level during dry periods. In fall, leave coneflower and black-eyed Susan seed heads for birds, but remove diseased phlox foliage rather than allowing infected material to remain in the bed. Avoid pushing tender growth with heavy fertilizer late in the season. During winter, use the standing stems and seed heads as structure, then remove them before spring growth becomes difficult to work around. These plants will not eliminate every gardening expense, but they change what your money creates. Instead of buying a temporary display and watching it disappear, you are establishing roots, crowns, and clumps that can mature over years. Some will produce seedlings, some will divide into additional plants, some will feed pollinators through summer and birds through winter. The first season requires attention. The second season begins to show the design. By the third season, the garden can look as though it has always belonged there. Before you go, comment which perennial flower you want to try first, because I use those questions to choose future growing guides. Which of these 9 perennials would you plant first in your garden? Take care of your plants.